What's up, guys? You're watching the Shield Bearer of Faith. Thank you for being here. Please forgive the raspy, hoarse-sounding voice, consequences of yelling at people. So, this past week, I got to train 3 different groups of police officers from my local city, local being here in Ukraine, right? And I have a lot of respect for what they do, partially because I was in law enforcement, but also partially because I'm aware of what happens here. So, police work, first responder work on its own, whether it's EMS, fire, police, whatever, it has a kind of a niche of its own in my heart because I've worked in that field and I know the stresses and strains that come with it, but I will tell you that it's different here. And so while I understand some of what these guys and girls go through, of course I can't really know all of, because thank God when I was an officer, we weren't actively at war, right? So we didn't have buildings blowing up daily like they do here. And when I say here, I don't mean in Ukraine. I mean in this specific city. Several students in my class had responded to a building that was blown up to do casualty evacuation and body removal within 12 hours of when I was teaching one of these groups, okay? So while I understand some of it, I of course cannot understand all of it because the things we dealt with were very different. Another big difference is in the US, we dealt much more frequently with armed individuals than they do here. So while there are guns all over this country, you don't hear about a lot of shootings. There's not a lot of shootings. They have more issues than that. So comparing my experience as an officer, there were guns everywhere. People got shot all the time. So we were responding frequently to things like that, from like domestic violence or gang violence or whatever. They just have different issues here. So I would like to think that I can relate to them, and I think I do usually. I think we come off in a humble but respectful way. And I was extremely excited to get to train these groups. I was very encouraged by these groups. They were quality people. You, of course, have your issues with a couple. But by and large, I think the people that we trained were good people. Good in a worldly sense, you know, most of which still do not know the Lord for certain. So that's why we speak about Christ and try to represent him appropriately. But as far as worldly standards go, they're trying to help their community here, and they do. So that's kind of a baseline of where my week was, but that's not the only thing I did. And I had early in the week on Monday, we had an evacuation that I went and assisted with. So me and one of my teammates, Sam, took one of our vehicles to go and assist a local chaplain, who's also a pastor, and another guy that we know. We do work with them quite a bit doing evacuations. We went to assist. There was also a Latvian news crew with us, so that was kind of cool. That was a very interesting situation, though. We usually try to do evacuations with one vehicle. In this specific occasion, we had 3. Now, why the one vehicle? Because experience and information indicate that one vehicle is less of a juicy target than 3. 3 people are less of a juicy target than 10, or whatever. You know, you can keep doing this math equation. We had a more risky evacuation purely because of number of vehicles and number of people. However, we went to do it anyway. And this was my first in-person exposure to an electronic warfare system, a drone jammer, right? The little antennas that'll stick up off the roof. So this chaplain friend of ours has his own system. And I am very unknowledgeable about these systems. I'm very open about that. But my personality is very much towards, I really appreciate experience more than knowledge. The internet is full of knowledge. The internet is not full of experience. And so I am not one of these guys that tries to act like I have experience in something when I may only have knowledge. okay? Keeping that in mind. Now, we all have moments. But so we go and we get these guys, they hook up their electronic warfare system to the roof of our vehicle, even though they're driving another one. My vehicle is going to be the middle car. And this thing, I'm told, I asked a bunch of questions, does a 50 meter bubble. That's not that far, okay? The bubble also does not cover all potential transmission frequencies, if I understand it right. So it will cover some of the drones. It will not necessarily cover all. And where we were going was within FPV drone range, first person view drone range. So if you see any advertisements for the headsets, they're all over the place here as far as the advertisements go. Their signs are everywhere trying to recruit drone operators. It's a fascinating transition in warfare. And the range for these is typically within 12 kilometers. Now, there are exceptions to everything, but 12 kilometers from where Russian positions are, you can guarantee that you are within FPV drone range, which is a much, much more risky endeavor, even more so in cars. But these drones are an incredibly lethal way of killing. And two of my teammates, one of them that's still here actually, had one of our team vehicles before I came back blown up by an FPV drone. And so this team member, Sam, that was with me, he was in that convoy and his vehicle is the one that got hit. So there are the considerations with all of this, right? The threat is real. Artillery goes in and, or rather goes out and comes in all the time, like howitzer style artillery from various places that I am. And that has a different range and a different threat level, right? But the FPV drones, those are the main thing we're watching the sky for. You can't do much about the artillery. You can try to be alert for the drone. Now, the electronic warfare system, the jammer, right? It's not perfect. It is made by man and it has limitations. But this was my first real experience using one. I've done other evacuations, but this is my first experience using one of these. So they hook it to the roof of my car, and Igor, this chaplain that we're connected with, tells me, okay, I'll let you know when to turn it on. I said, okay. He intends to let me know by phone through text. Well, that doesn't work because where we are, there is not signal for that. There's no phone service the majority of the time. You have to really try to find phone service. So that is issue number one, okay? Perfect world, maybe a tabletop version, you know, the written plan version is that you're going to text me when you want me to turn this on. The real life version is that won't work. So that results in when he wants to tell me to turn this on, he pulls off to the side of the road and he hops out of his vehicle to tell me to turn it on. That is a potential risk. You have stopped moving, okay? So that's something to keep in the back of your mind. So we go and we're going to pick up people. Now, we have about 7 people, including 2 juveniles, that we're going to pick up. And it takes forever. It takes more than 4 hours to get these people picked up just for a whole bunch of reasons. And within this time frame, we have this jammer turned on because we're a static target with multiple vehicles. And it starts to become nighttime. And eventually, me and Sam start to smell the jammer overheating. It's got a fan system on it and we can smell it. So we alert Igor and we're like, hey, I think it's overheating. So he's like, all right, cool, turn it off. So we turn it off. Now in my brain, it's cold outside. It's gonna cool off quickly. We'll be able to turn it back on quickly in my brain. So I give it a little while and I said, okay, it's probably cooled off by now. It's like any other electronic system, right? I flip the switch to turn it back on. It won't work. It's grinding something. I can hear it and it's still having issues. So I was like, oh, keep that thing off. So the system that we were going to rely on to provide some level of protection from drones is no longer functioning. And we're not done yet. So that's an interesting situation. And it was dark by this point. So there is no watching the skies anymore. Now you're just sitting. And there's a huge amount of prayer that comes with that. So we finally get these people. We finally get them loaded up. Again, for a lot of reasons, it took forever. And we start moving again. And we're heading out of town. We're on this straight stretch. And again, this whole area is dangerous. We were on this straight stretch, open road, flat road, nothing on either side of it. We're passing essentially through a field, but it is a paved road. And Igor and his driver end up hitting 140 kilometers an hour going down this road. And we're trying to keep up with them because, again, we're the middle car. And the FPV drone electronic warfare system that we're using is mounted to the roof by magnets, okay? And then it has a power cable that comes through my window. I'm in the passenger seat. Comes through my window and connects directly to the car battery, which in this car happens to be underneath the driver's seat. And so the cable's coming through the window. We're trying to keep up at 140 kilometers an hour. We're trying to get out of town so we don't get blown up. And the magnets won't hold at that speed. Apparently, we found this out because it rips off the roof. The cable goes flying. I grab it, and the whole system slams against the side of the vehicle. So we pull off the road, and now we're sitting again. And these antennas have smacked the side of the vehicle. They sit 2 feet off of the actual system on the roof. And they have broken off, and they're gone. And then I'm being told, those are the expensive part of this $2,000 system. And $2,000 is the low end. These range apparently from $2,000 to $5,000 worth of price. Again, I don't know much about them as to why or what the differences are. But my guess is they have more coverage of different drone frequencies. So now we pull off the side of the road. We hop out and we're looking on the ground in the dark on this road for these antennas. My partner, he finds one of them, and then this police vehicle pulls up beside us. We were just working with him. He was helping us get these civilians out. He comes up and he tells us in their language something. And I'm like, what's he trying to tell me? So I pull out my phone. It's incredibly slow. We get him to translate it for us. He's like, turn off your GPS right now. Turn off your geolocating. So we made sure all of that was off. And then we go and we eventually find the other antenna. And we start going out of town. Now, here's the whole reason to tell you the whole story. Everybody's fine. We did successfully evacuate 7 people, including 2 juveniles, right? Nobody got hurt, praise God. On our way out of town, though, I heard and saw in the corner of my eye a flash of what appeared to be white, maybe 100 to 200 yards away from us, but it was dark, so it's hard to tell. And it was a different crack. I hear artillery all the time. It has a different thunder. This was an FPV drone detonating somewhere over here, 200 yards away, as we're driving out of town. And we've got our windows down. That's how I could hear it. So it goes crack, and I hear it, and I see it. I'm like, oh, man, that's like a ghost. There's no way that I could have seen it. No way I could have heard it. Here's the whole reason I tell y'all the whole story. On paper, recently, my team and I have talked about maybe we should acquire one of these electronic warfare systems. You can just get them, but they're expensive, thousands of dollars. And so when I was having this conversation with my team, part of what I have to do as the team lead here is regulate some of the conversation. I have to play devil's advocate sometimes. It doesn't mean I'm trying to shoot down the idea, but I'm trying to pick it apart a little bit so that someone can explain to me a little bit more. So the conversation was, hey, maybe we should get a drone jammer. I asked, cool, who knows about them? And then plenty of people in the team brought up things that they think about them. I think this, or I think it's like this, or yeah, this is the answer to that question. And then I would follow that up with, how do you know? You can tell me what you think, that's all right. But tell me how you know it's true. Because we can read whatever we want. But hands-on experience trumps almost any training you can have. You can go to college for 4 years and not know anything about the topic that you're going to go try to work in because you haven't done it yet, potentially. There's a reason that I have a criminal justice bachelor's degree and still went to the exact same police academy that everyone else did, because the degree did not make you an officer. The experience, the hands-on actual experience, that is where the value lies. Now, some training venues, some training formats can try to bridge the gap more effectively than others. That's what I try to do. I try to bridge that gap by adding stress into my medical trainings and bringing my experiences to those environments and sharing it so these guys can learn. But the experience, you just have trouble getting without doing it. You can only simulate so much. You can only read so much. So back to this drone jammer. I learned a huge amount in that one day about these jammers. One thing I learned was they're not perfect. I knew that anyway, but I got out my own version of what that means. It can overheat. Now, I had heard that's possible, and it makes sense why it could, but it's cold outside, guys. Why would that jammer overheat when it's freezing temperatures outside? I don't know, but my experience now tells me it will overheat. So you can't just leave it on. It's not perfect. The next thing I know is if we ever have to drive really fast to get out of a danger area, the jammer won't hold, which means you either need to stabilize it with something much more rigid or it won't hold. So that changes everything about that jammer. I've learned a lot. The hands-on experience is something that is invaluable. So now I personally have these experiences that next time we go to use this will be in my mind, things I have to consider. And that is the difference in knowledge and experience, right? I had a guy that came and asked if he could hang out at my training when we were in the Donbass recently, training soldiers. And so I let him come. He's from Norway, I think. Netherlands, might be Netherlands. He speaks English, and he just took a 2-week TAC med style training from the Hospitallers. So like the Knights of St. John, for back in the Crusades, they still have an organization of sorts. And the Hospitallers are medics that work in a variety of capacities here. So he just took a 2-week course from them, and he is now an ambulance driver. And he came and observed my class. And he was a nice enough guy, but at one point, he started to argue a little bit when I was talking about a way to apply pressure with a bandage. He started to disagree with me. I had to shut him down, and I did. I started to politely, but then I had to shut him down because he's only got the classroom version. He only has the knowledge, and he did have knowledge, I'll give him that. He did not have the hands-on experience. So when I'm telling this guy that you can use a bandage to apply pressure and control bleeding, he was of the opinion that no, you have to use your hand to apply pressure. I said, that might work in an ambulance setting. It might. It will not work for these guys in the trenches. It will not work. They're not going to have enough hands to hold on the person. They're going to have to use a bandage. And so I had to give him these examples and rationalize my reasoning. But the fact is, I've used bandages to control bleeding. There are many people way more experienced than I am. And the experience is something that I really try to glean something from. Unfortunately, there is a huge amount of people in this world that are trying to present information to you and me based on no actual experience, based on opinion alone. So, it makes someone like me want to ask, you're telling me what you think, but how do you know? And I can relate that spiritually too, because this is what worked to bring me to a point of salvation. I had spent my whole childhood off and on going to church, where people would tell me what they thought about the Bible or what they read in the book, in the Bible, right? What I didn't have a personal example of up until I gave my life to Christ, just before that, was real people that would tell me how they knew what they believed was right, how they knew. And the way that they knew was the fruit of the Spirit. And I must be hitting on something valuable right now because I feel the Spirit. I get chills when I talk about the Lord. I had to meet people that were living their faith. They weren't telling me an opinion. They were telling me a testimony. There's a difference. When I tell you guys that I was there when this drone jammer failed, and I was the one that grabbed the cable when it ripped off the car, and I was in the roadway trying to find the antennas. When I tell you that, it's because I lived it. I know. I don't think it happened. I know it happened. When I tell you guys that we go and encounter people that are suffering, I know it because I lived it. And I'm telling you the testimony of it. That's what the Gospels are. Matthew, Mark, and John are testimonies. Luke is a little different, but Matthew, Mark, and John, as far as I understand it, are someone's testimony. They know it because they lived it. They saw it, whatever it was, right? So, right before I gave my life to Christ, I got to see my dad be that example for me. And I was going to a men's group with these other men who were telling me, one was telling me, his name was Joe, he was a cocaine addict. And he's not anymore. Cool. Why aren't you a cocaine addict, Joe? And he would tell me his testimony. He didn't tell me what he thought. He told me what happened. Same with my dad. I got to observe, and I knew him maybe in some ways better than almost anybody on earth. I got to observe him living his faith. And then when he would tell me why the changes were happening or what was going on, it was giving the credit to the Lord. So he's telling me what happened to him. I can see with my own eyes what's happening to him. And then when I gave my life to Jesus, and I was in that church row by myself, nobody else was with me. I gave my life earlier in the week. I committed it. I was like, God, I'm going to give my life to you, but I expect you to show up. And I was searching for him. So I went to a church. I didn't know where else to go. And I'm in like the third row and I'm singing this song. And this one verse comes up that I'm alive. I'm alive. You breathe on me. You revive me. That's the only thing I remember from the whole service. When I said those words, I got hit. I felt it. I've never felt anything like it. It was overwhelming. And I felt so guilty and so forgiven all at once. I couldn't mistake it. That's not my opinion, guys. I don't think it happened. I know it happened. I lived it. And the other part of that proof that my wife is a witness to, that many other people I know might be a witness to, is then they got to see the evidence, the fruit of the Spirit. They got to see and experience what was happening in my life. I got to see and experience what God had done to me. Because knowledge wasn't good enough. You can know all you want about the book. You should know as much as you can absorb from the Bible. But guys, up until the Holy Spirit hit me, up until I gave God everything that I had, I committed everything I am. Up until that point, it was just a book to me. It didn't matter. I could read it every day if I chose to, and I would just have the knowledge. I wouldn't have the experience. So I would like to maybe challenge you, as my dear viewer. What are your experiences? Feel free to comment if you like, and you don't have to. Do you think that God has changed you? Or do you know it? What about people in your life, in your sphere of influence? Your wife, your kids, your husband, your parents, your whatever, coworkers. People that tell you they're Christians, pastors. What fruit of the Spirit do you see? It can look different, but what do you see? And then more importantly, when they talk to you about their salvation, how do they know? Was the fruit of the Spirit after? Did things change? Because I would argue, this is such a dangerous thing, I would argue that if nothing changed, then nothing happened. I tell all these soldiers and police officers and civilians, everyone I train, we're training in life and death topics. Unfortunately, most of them are already dead. They just don't know it. They're zombies walking around the world. They might be breathing, they might be moving, but they're not alive. Because there's only one thing that gives you true life, and that's Christ. So when we're trying to save one more life, yeah, we're trying to spread it through a physical, informational sense, training, trying to teach about life and death, ways to delay death, hopefully save lives. That's all great. But we will all die one day. And I don't mean that as a depression. I mean that as a conviction. Are you living? Really? What are the signs of life? Do you feel alive? The answer is no, it is not too late to change that. Have a great day. We are trying our best to do good things here. God is doing great things. I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your patience with my voice. Make sure you're alive.